We're back for another video, and it coincides that it's an autumn, at least at the time we are recording it, and we have touched up on that we usually would like to do blood test at the beginning of the summer and at the end. And therefore, we're going to do another video about blood testing. So benefits, risks, impacts on health. Some people might be overstressing too much and doing too many blood tests. More often than not, we see that people don't do an efficient amount of blood testing to actually make any sense and develop some kind of efficient strategies to improve their performance, health, and so on. Let's go through like an overview of blood tests. Like, what are the most common blood tests that people you see that come to you that have already done some blood tests, and what do you ask them do extra, or is this never a case and they come already with complete panel for you to check up and give them the best advice possible?
Yeah, so luckily for me, on my landing page for blood work reviews, I do have a sample report that I request and a short little video of like why it's so important. Um, and so most often when I get a blood work review request, they usually come with all the correct blood work that I consider the minimum for twice a year blood work, right? The minimum for sometime in the early spring and sometime in the fall time to get blood tests. And those are really the places or the times where I think is the most valuable for most people that live in northern latitudes, is those times of the year, because it allows you to focus on the thing. Like if you get blood tests in the spring, it allows you to focus on the coming season of all the things that you can improve to improve your blood work. And then the blood test in the fall essentially is your report card, right? At the end, it tells you how much did you actually improve those things, how much did you ignore, and now do we have to play remediation? Do we have to introduce some things for the winter time to keep you healthy because you didn't quite do, or you just weren't capable of doing the things that needed to be done to improve your blood test? Because it's certainly easier in the summertime to improve blood work with habits that we talk about all the time, because the weather is good, there's lots of UV, the days are nice and long, so even if you work a 9-to-5 job, you have plenty of time to get more outside time and more solar exposure and exercise outside more if that's some of the recommendations. But if you slack on those, it's going to show up in your blood work in the fall, right? If you slack on those, we're going to know. So there are some other
I have a list in front of me, and maybe we can go through like the most basic stuff and then go into more complex details about what does this blood show, why is it important to check, and why would you go into deeper details. Maybe let's start with like a complete blood count and what can it show anyone there. What markers we are looking at, and probably is not as essential as much as what can we find by looking in those markers. And I'm talking about hematocrit, red blood count, and those kind of things. So what does it actually show?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I actually think that I can bring up a sample report and we can just speak to that. That way people have it in front of them. And so if you don't mind allowing me to share, and I'll just pop that up. It's just a sample report that you can view, and we can speak to that and make it a little bit easier for the audience. Let me see if I can share screen.
All yours.
Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so in this again, this is not a real person or anything like that. This is just a sample report that you will see when you go to my landing page. So first thing is you want to have a complete picture of insulin sensitivity. Most people will only get their glucose tested. If you go to just a normal doctor for a health checkup once a year, excuse me, you'll only have blood glucose. If you're lucky, you might get hemoglobin A1C. So you'll get this marker right here, right? Blood glucose, and you will get right here, hemoglobin A1C, and you will almost never get this one right here, insulin, right? So that's one of the key ones that's going to tell us early, way early, before a doctor even really talks to you about eating better. if you get those three markers, you can get a really good grasp on your insulin sensitivity and whether you need improving it way before problems start to show up, right? Because
And
your
we
glucose
touched
can
up
be,
on that in previous video. If anyone wants to can really dig deep into insulin sensitivity and what it is,
yeah,
how it works, benefits, downfalls, and all that kind of stuff.
yep,
We're
yep.
not
So that's number one, right? We want for all the reasons that we talked about in the video, you want to have all three of those markers, right? Number two is most people will also, you know, with their checkup, they'll get their cholesterol panel, right? It'll be like these three markers, total cholesterol, four markers, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides. And that's great, right? Because we've also done videos on how cholesterol turns into your sex hormones. But that's kind of where it stops. Like most people kind of get their glucose, get their cholesterol panel, and they might get their blood count, right? What white blood cells, red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and that's great. That's basic stuff right there. But that doesn't really tell us the grasp of how everything is running, right? Because like we stated in previous videos about sex hormones and vitamin D, those come from cholesterol. They come from LDL cholesterol, to be specific, right here. And if we see that LDL cholesterol is elevated, the first thing I want to know is, hey, how much vitamin D have you been making with that cholesterol? How much, in this case, right? We can see the sample report is clearly showing low. And and the next thing I want to know is how much DHEA are you making out of that cholesterol? And how much cortisol? Because all of these three right here that I just pointed out, vitamin D, DHEA, and cortisol all come from cholesterol, right? So if you're showing me a record of all your previous checkups and your cholesterol is staying the same and it's elevated or it's slightly moving up year after year, the first thing I want to know is, hey, is your body making stuff with that? Because if it's not, that tells me that there's some steps that you're missing in your lifestyle that could potentially fix the cholesterol problem without any drugs, zero drugs, and probably help you not be on other drugs like vitamin D, right? You're not going to have to supplement vitamin D if you're making it properly from your LDL cholesterol. And coincidentally, DHEA turns into your sex hormones. As soon as I find them right here, they turn directly
It
into
was just a little bit
progesterone. Yep, they turn into progesterone. They turn into testosterone and free testosterone and estradiol. So if those are also out of whack, then you're potentially looking at, I don't know, 3-4 drugs that your doctor might want to recommend to you, where it could be as simple as, hey, you know what, this whole chain is broken. We just need to fix your lifestyle so that LDL cholesterol properly gets sulfated into vitamin D, DHEA, pregnenolone, and then those will turn into your estrogen, progesterone, and testosterones. So now you can avoid all those downstream drugs, or if you weren't even going to consider taking those, you will probably start feeling better if your testosterone was low, for example.
And this is something I kind of want to highlight, that this might be the potential risk when someone misdiagnosing you. You know, I've seen recently on social media people talking about how people are against statins and they don't understand what they're doing and this and that. And then I look up this person, he's a psychologist or he's this and he's that. And I'm like, I understand you want to be correct, you want to be right, but you are literally just regurgitating what doctors tell you. And more often than not, they have not taught to look into past that. They have learned to look into cholesterol levels and, hey, we need to control this no matter what. Even though we now have seen, I believe it was in the study about the blue zones where they had really high LDL and they had really LDL, low density. There is low density and then high low density. There are 4 of them actually, different cholesterol types. So it's not as simple as like, hey, cholesterol is out of whack, you need to have a statin. Basically,
no, in fact, that could cause downstream problems, right? Just like I highlighted, right? And again, this can sound like conspiracy theory or not, but I physically talk to people and know people that work in what's called the medical algorithm field. What does that mean? That means that there are people writing programs, writing algorithms for medical facilities. Those programs guide decision making around diagnosing anything really. And here's what they tell me. Hey, our programs are made to make the hospital or the facility money, right? They're not made to facilitate the health of the person or the outcome of the particular situation. They are made to make the hospital money. Period. End of story. That's how they pitch their product, their algorithm. So when you go to a doctor and he runs blood work on you, they might intentionally only be following the algorithm. Like, I'm not saying the doctor is intentionally knowing these things. He's just intentionally just following the algorithm. And the algorithm is intentionally only showing you your cholesterol panel so that then that you get a statin. Then you can come back 6 months later and tell him about your ED. And then he'll prescribe you some testosterone because
I
then the
was about
algorithm,
to say that's oftentimes you prescribe statin, Viagra, and so on and so forth, not looking deeper into that these things can be managed quite easily.
yes, because the algorithm intentionally does it that way. The algorithm intentionally tells the doctor, test for this. Oh, this is happening. Give them this. 6 months later, when they come back complaining of, because the algorithm already knows the cycle, it already knows this particular layout that I just described. So then it goes, okay, 6 months later on the checkup, if the patient is complaining about ED, now check his testosterone, right? But if you crushed his cholesterol 6 months ago with a statin, he's not going to have any testosterone. So then you test for testosterone, and now you go, oh, you can go on testosterone replacement therapy. Here's another prescription for you. And now that kind of gets fixed. But when they prescribe the testosterone or check the testosterone, they didn't check for other things like vitamin D. So now you start feeling like your bones hurt and things of like that. So then a vitamin D test comes back the next 6 months. Vitamin D test comes low. Oh, you know what? Here's an injection for your vitamin D is really low. It's in the teens or the 20s. Here's a 50,000 unit injection for you that you can come back for every week to get. You see what I'm saying? This is about making money. It's not
And
about
we
fixing it.
have a video on vitamin D as well. So let me just give you a scenario when somebody has an regular blood check and he goes to the doctor, they only check cholesterol and they come back and tell him, hey, you need this, you need that, you need a couple pills. How do they go about telling doctor, hey, you know what, maybe let's double check it and do a little bit deeper kind of
By
observation
knowing
before
exactly
we
what I
commit
just
to
said,
that?
just simply stating, well, my LDL cholesterol is supposed to be turning into things. I know this, right? Because I'm an educated person and I know that, because this is simple, right? Like you can just Google, what does LDL cholesterol turn into? And it can tell you, like, it's not hard. You don't have to open up a book. You can literally Google this information.
So they
And
could
just
go to
being
doctor and
informed.
open up their AI app and say, doctor, by the way, did you know that LDL converts to this? Can we double check it before we commit to any medication?
Absolutely. That would be the lowest. That is at this day and age in the modern world, it's as simple as pulling out your phone in the consultation with the doctor and being proactive about your health, knowing that there's an algorithm in the background trying to squeeze money out of you and not necessarily trying to fix you right then and there. So you have to be proactive about your health. You have to be a little bit proactive about knowing some of the ins and the outs. And you don't even have to do it right then and there. You don't, nothing tells you, nothing is mandated by you that you have to take that medication right then and there. You can go home and assess this more objectively on your own time when you have a level head of, hey, this is the medication he wants to put me on. These are all the side effects. And then the reason he wants to put me on this is because of this cholesterol. Let's look into a few more things of why my cholesterol might be high, right? This is a perfect example of this because then that saves you headaches down the road.
Can you go
And
to your full red blood count stuff and just go from there? Because usually that's how the test comes through, because that's kind of like lowest hanging fruit. I believe it was like hematocrit and all those kind of things first. So let's go through that. White blood count, red blood count, hemoglobin. So what
yeah,
kind of physiological impact can be seen, felt, if anything of this is slightly off?
yeah. So if your red blood cell count is very elevated, you may actually get I don't normally see that other than in two situations: drug use, right? Actual drugs that are going to cause red blood cell count to go up, or an electromagnetic field stimulation. So I do use this panel right here to let me know what your body is sensing, because these three right here, red, I'm trying to highlight it. There we go. The red blood cell count, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. Specifically, these first two tell me a lot about your environment.
So
How is your body?
you would ask about environment and if they're taking any, let's say, performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely. Yeah.
ask, are you taking anything and do you do any cardio?
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? Like drugs, like if they're elevated or out of whack, I want to
Right.
know, are there drugs involved? Because if there's drugs involved, that tells me that I got to be a little bit more intense with what I tell them to do, right? Like the intensity of whatever the remediation is probably going to need to be taken up a notch. The next thing that I ask them is environment. Where do you work? How often do you get outside? Those sorts of things. What's your blood pressure? Do you ever test your blood pressure? Things of that nature. And then the other thing is habits. What kind of habits, as far as cardiovascular activity or health, do you do or not do, right? In that case, when these markers are out of whack, those are the first places I go. The next thing is these MCV, MCH, MCHC. These tell me how your body is perceiving oxygen carrying capacity. So what these do is they actually are telling your body how much hemoglobin to put into each red blood cell, right? So if these are elevated, for example, your body is demanding more oxygen carrying capacity, but it's not getting it. That's why MCH or MCHV will go up, because your body is wanting to put more hemoglobin in each red blood cell, because it is sensing that even though blood flow is good and red blood cell count is right, oxygen is not getting delivered appropriately at the mitochondria. So it starts to tick those up. If those are low, there may be too much reactive oxygen species being made. So you might end up with something like sleep apnea or something. And so I would start asking about those types of things. Hey, do you snore? Do you have have you ever been diagnosed with sleep apnea, or do you even know? Right. The rest of these, the next thing that I look at is platelets. Platelets are the smallest cell in the body that has mitochondria. So most cells have about, I don't know, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 mitochondria in them. But platelets are unique. They're so small that they only have about 5 or 8 mitochondria in them. So if your mitochondria are being affected by anything, it could be environment, it could be food, it could be you name it, anything that affects mitochondria, platelets will be some of the first cells that suffer. So autoimmune disorders, things of that nature, because your mitochondria, because the platelets are so small, if your mitochondria are being compromised, they will show up in platelets first, because they only have 5 to 8 mitochondria total in the whole cell. So if the mitochondria are faulty, platelets start to die. Platelets start to become produced at a much lower level than they should. And you can see that immediately in this type of blood work. The rest of these right here, most of the time these are normal. Like I've seen people taking enormous amount of drugs and have an enormous amount of dysregulation, and these are still normal. If these are out of whack, I do ask whether you were sick while or after you took the blood work. And that also goes for C-reactive protein,
So
which is
before you move
inflammatory.
on, can you just touch up on that blood panel you just discussed? What physiological effects would someone see, feel when these things are off? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
lethargy.
So hemoglobin and hematocrit, if they're low, you're going to just feel gassed easily. You're not actually going to be able to train very hard. But most often, I don't see that with people that are training. I see that with people that don't train, and so they might not feel much, right? They might not feel much other than, hey, when I run up some stairs, I might get winded easily. The other way around, right? If the hemoglobin and hematocrit is very high, you might start to get dizziness, headaches, very easily. You might even feel like you're underwater, like it's almost like you can breathe, but you kind of can't unless you really get your blood pumping, because it's so thick. And so there's so much red blood cell count going on. And most often that's also going to be accompanied by higher blood pressures. Whereas the low hematocrit, low hemoglobin, and low red blood cell count are most often accompanied by low blood pressures. So dizziness is probably the main thing, whether it's low or high, that people will experience, whether that's while you're exercising or just random bouts throughout the day.
You touched up on cholesterol. I think that was quite deep already to understand ins and outs. What about thyroid panel? So what's happening there? What are we looking into? Just a couple of days ago, I was looking into one of the studies where like different activity of the thyroid will influence how you're storing body fat. So, and it was literally not so much about calories anymore, but about like how your hormones are lined up. So maybe find that place and look into that. So here it is, T4 TSH, reverse T3. So what's happening there? What are we looking at, and what does it do? Just you just scroll past it.
Yeah. So most often when you get a normal blood work, just a checkup, and you tell them, because thyroid almost never gets checked unless you're actually asking for it, or you're thinking that you have thyroid problems because you've gained weight or whatever. So unfortunately, doctors also don't do this correctly. They only test their TSH, right? That's almost always is just TSH. I'm like, great,
Right.
that's the signaling part of thyroid, but that doesn't mean anything. That just means that your signal from your pituitary to your thyroid gland is overactive or underactive. It doesn't tell you what you're making. So the requirements to properly assess your thyroid and whether it's being made correctly. And it also gives me details of whether the habits that need to change are at night or in the morning are as follows. TSH is definitely going to be in there. And then free T4. Free T4 is inactive thyroid. It gets made at night. So it tells me about nighttime behavior. If that is underperforming, it tells me, I want to know what you do at night. How late do you sleep, or when do you go to sleep? Do you have lights on all the time? That sort of stuff. That's the type of stuff that I start looking into. As far as if free T4 is being manufactured correctly or not. And understanding, which is what I clearly do understand, is that it gets made predominantly at night. And the thing that is responsible for signaling correctly is melatonin. So I start looking and asking about questions about sleep, like how do you sleep? At what time do you go to sleep? What's the behavior right before you go to sleep? That sort of stuff. And then the next thing that I see here is reverse T3. Reverse T3 plays a role, but only when we see that aberrant things going on with free T3, which is down here lower, so, right here. So free T3 is active thyroid. It gets converted from free T4 in the morning, right? So about 2 to 3 hours before wake up time, before your regular wake up time, the body starts raising body temperature. The way it does that is by converting T4 into free T3. And if your wake cycle, the behavior around waking up, is off, then the signaling component of converting T4 to T3 is off. Because it is active, it's going to wake you up. So the body intentionally never converts very much T4 to T3 unless it accurately knows that it is morning time and it's the start of the day. Because if it were to convert it, say, in the middle of the afternoon, well, it's going to keep you up at night. And you're a diurnal creature, not a nocturnal creature. So it physically quenches the conversion of T4 to T3 at every other time of the day other than when it is in the morning. So if you're, for example, if your free T4 is normal, but your free T3 is underperforming, well, that tells me we need to focus on your morning time behavior. Okay. So that is the thyroid really starts to tell me about behavior at bookends of the day, if you follow my logic here. And then if free T3, for example, is really, really high, then that's when I start looking into reverse T3. Or if it's really, really low, that's when I would also look at reverse T3. Reverse T3, think of it like an instant potential free T3. Think of it like the savings account for T4 that's already been converted to T3, but your body has chosen to save it and not utilize it at that time. So there should always be some level of reverse T3. And if you've been dieting or maybe potentially malnourished of some kind, and we'll talk about that in relationship to thyroid, then your reverse T3 might go up because your body is sensing, hey, whatever's going on environmentally, we need to preserve this free T3 and put it into reverse T3 so we can slowly pass it on, because the conversion of T4 to T3 isn't happening very good, right?
So what
So,
about like, can people feel it without testing?
yes.
I'll tell you from my experience, if my TSH gets above 2, I start to get cold feeling in my feet and my hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people are very sensitive to some of that. And for you, it's above 2. For others, it might not be until it's above 3 or 4, right? But you're just sensitive, and you, over the course of getting blood work regularly, you know that that's where it's at. And yes, you definitely can. You can feel when thyroid is underactive, and you can even feel when thyroid is overactive. thyroid that's underactive, you're definitely going to feel possibly a little bit coldness in your hands and feet. You definitely might feel a little bit more lethargic. You're definitely going to feel less energetic throughout the day if it's T3 that's underperforming. If it's T4 that's underperforming, you may or may not feel very much because it's inactive to begin with. So it's less. If you are feeling things that are thyroid related, you definitely need free T3 and reverse T3 tested at a minimum, because those are the active components. And if it was very elevated, you might start to get like accelerated hair loss, feeling hot very regularly, heart rate going up, things of that nature. Because thyroid, free T3, most people just relate that to your metabolism and correlate it with calories. It does way more than calories. It's going to dictate heart rate, breathing rate, temperature of the body, all those things. So yes, if you had like an Oura ring or something like that, you may notice body temperature fluctuating a degree or two upwards or downwards, depending on what your free T3 is doing. So those are all valid things. And in terms of nutritionally, you might have these underperforming because you're not eating any seafood. You're not getting enough iodine and selenium and all the cofactors for iodine and selenium to be uptaken by the deaminase enzymes. So this starts to tell us more about everything that you're doing nutritionally, sleep wise, wake wise, and those sorts of things, and your behavior around light.
And
Because
again, this is
light is the
something
signaling component.
like we have highlighted many times, that if you are doing a blood test and you are getting a feedback without having a conversation with the person who is giving you feedback, there is a chance that you're not getting correct feedback, because they're not asking you about what you are doing specific to you. Like, especially we did blood tests thoroughly when I was traveling every 2 weeks, very long distance, like 7-8 hour flights, 16-hour flights. My blood tests were all over the place, but we knew why it's happening. If I had gone to doctor, they would have put me on a lot of medicine. They would just say, dude, whatever the hell you're doing, you're gonna die.
Yeah, certainly,
Pretty much.
certainly would have.
So
Now,
you kind of touched up on that. I would like you to go into kidney health. Like
okay,
creatinine, EGFR, those kind of things, all the good stuff that people would really want to look into. That BUN, so all those things. What
yeah,
are we looking
yeah.
on?
Yeah, so the things that I look at for kidney health and liver health are going to be kidney wise, EGFR. Right now, when it comes to performance enhanced athletes and stuff like that, EGFR is a marker that I kind of ignore, and I'd rather go with a C-reactive protein, which is not a test that's on here. And so, depending on your situation, this is not 100% inclusive of every marker that you might need. Right? If you're somebody that's enhanced, I tend to ignore the EGFR, and I tend to go with the cystatin C, a blood test, and a cystatin C EGFR. So you can calculate if you see this E right here, it says EGFR. GFR means glomerular filtration rate, but the E in front of it stands for estimated. In other words, it's being calculated on your creatinine, right? So creatinine is going to be elevated with anybody that trains hard and eats plenty of protein and is taking PEDs. That's actually good. That means that your creatine system is working correctly, meaning you're producing a lot of ATP and dismantling a lot of ATP. That's actually a good thing, right? We want to know the energetics of the cell, and that's a marker that's telling us that. But when EGFR is being calculated, normal EGFR is being calculated off of creatinine, people that train will tend to have a low EGFR number, and they tend to freak out about that because the doctor tells them, oh, your kidneys are not filtering correctly or whatever. If you go with a cystatin C EGFR, that kind of mitigates that, because the cystatin C is an actual protein that gets cleared by the kidney and specifically by the kidney. So now you're focusing on the exact kidney doing the work.
And I think this would be a perfect time to kind of put in that, try to standardize procedure you go through to do a blood test. Try to eat similar, try to have similar amount of rest days before, try to drink same amount of water before you do that, and so on and so forth. Because sometimes people don't understand the smallest. This is just a snapshot, and you can completely mess up that snapshot if you went to McDonald's before doing a blood test.
Or you decided not to drink any water for 5 or 6 hours and then go get a blood test, right? Like that's going to mess up your BUN and your creatinine ratio because you're not properly hydrated at that point in time. And so that's going to change things acutely. These markers here in all of these, almost all of these right here, they can change very fast. They can change very, very quickly. So you're 100% right. You want to get it done about at the same time of the day. You want to be about the same level of hydration and about the same quality of food that you normally eat to make these remotely accurate. And if they're not, right, then note that to yourself and to the doctor or whoever else is analyzing the blood work of things that you did, so that they can either write that off or not. Other things in here, right? So that's the BUN creatinine ratio is telling us BUN, which is blood urea nitrogen, which is the byproduct of the liver dismantling urea, meaning urea is a byproduct of the Krebs cycle, and nitrogen is protein. So it's essentially BUN is telling us, if BUN is high, it's telling us that your body is dismantling a lot of proteins, right? That's could potentially be bad depending on the situation, right? Like if you're not a trained individual or anything like that, or training very hard, high BUN tells me there might be a physiological problem. Why are you getting rid of so much protein? Why is there so much misfolding going on, protein misfolding? Because that's essentially what's going on there. And if it's nice and low, then it tells us that your liver is processing things correctly, and protein misfolding is happening at a low degree. And everything, right? We have a video on protein, and everything in your body is being created by proteins. And so if you have a lot of protein misfolding, that potentially means that peptides aren't being made correctly in your body. That potentially means that neurotransmitters aren't being made correctly in your body, etc. Right? If you go look at that in-depth video on protein, you can quickly understand that almost everything that's governing how you function is being made from protein. And if your BUN creatinine ratio is elevated, specifically your BUN, that starts to tell us that that's where the problem is, right? There's something going on at the liver level of blood urea nitrogen being excreted very, very quickly.
I
So
feel
it tells
like
us
the protein importance need to be highlighted over and over and over again, because people always think it's just for muscle. Oh, you're taking protein shake is for muscle, and no, it's for you being healthy.
yeah. Yep.
Watch
And
out for
so,
protein.
and then we have electrolytes, right? So that actually tells us about your hydration status. These will be all messed up if you decided to water fast, for example, and get a blood test, right? So, they could easily be messed up by under drinking or over drinking, right? You decide you want to be hyperhydrated. Well, these will come back a little bit diluted at that point in time, right? Then we have carbon dioxide. That actually tells us about your aerobic capabilities, because your body does not breathe by sensing oxygen. That's a misconception that a lot of people don't know. Your body breathes by the amount of CO2 in the blood. So the CO2 in the blood tells us how well your aerobic capacity is, your oxygen exchange capacity. If you have a nice high CO2 level, that tells us that you have a good CO2 tolerance, which means that the more CO2 is involved up in the blood, the more oxygen is going to be exchanged. So you have a lot of good aerobic capacity. If CO2 is low, then you're exchanging very little oxygen. So this can even influence these right here, right? Your oxygen carrying capacity. If you're consistently not aerobically fit, and you are not, for example, your mouth breathing all the time, you're not nasal breathing and retaining your CO2 so that the body gets the correct signaling to exchange more oxygen for it, then the body's going to compensate for that. How's it going to compensate? By increasing oxygen carrying capacity, which could thicken your blood. Then we look at let me see here. ALT and AST right here. They're on the next page. So that's going to be, most doctors classify those as liver enzymes. Again, this is knowing the person, right? If you're a trained athlete, or taking any kind of enhancement, these should be elevated, because these are not just liver enzymes. They are enzymes related to the dismantling of all kinds of other things, including recovering from weight training, recovering from exercise. And if you're taking drugs that accelerate those things, then these will be elevated. So a test that may be more appropriate for somebody like that is a GGT test. That is an actual enzyme that is made by the liver itself. So now these are not, these can be made by other tissues in the body. So if these are elevated, the first thing I like to ask is, hey, are you training really hard? Are you taking any PEDs? Then if the answer is yes to any of those, then I kind of start ignoring those unless they're aberrantly high, like in the 200 or 300s. But if they're mildly elevated, the thing that I suggest, hey, next time you get blood tests, we might want to add a GGT test to actually look at your liver. And most often than not, I find that the GGT is perfectly normal. It's actually probably in the low range, and their AST and ALT is elevated because of their training load.
Yeah, and like we always keep telling, don't do just partial blood tests. You're most likely going to do this once or twice a year. Just go full MOT instead of trying to fix one little thing that somewhere down the line might be fixed completely different ways than taking medication. It's imagine you're taking your car to garage to check it up, and all they do is just walk around and see if the tires are not flat. You're not really
Yeah.
keep driving the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Or and then you get into the enhancement realm of it, not necessarily like enhancement through drugs, but you're already a healthy person and you want to get more out of your body, right? At that point, just like that car analogy, well, then you actually really do need a thorough diagnosis because you don't know where to put the right pressure, right? You don't know if thyroid is the thing that you need to focus on, or maybe sex hormone production, or maybe insulin sensitivity, right? Like you don't know that if you don't have all the components to look at to begin with.
Yeah, you also touched up on insulin sensitivity. We have couple videos on sex hormones alone. Do you want to brush slightly on sex hormones at all, or
No, I think they're fairly well covered with what I explained with LDL
what I
cholesterol,
think
right?
is important to highlight is that for me personally, looking at your sex hormones will be the least prioritized thing. Everyone usually
Yeah.
comes in, let's check my testosterone, let's check my this, let's check my that. And I'm like, let's check everything else, and then we'll figure out if it's good or bad. Because I've
Yeah.
seen consistently, specifically with people I work with who are running multiple businesses, they are stressed out to eyeballs, and then many other things. And they're like, oh, I went to TRT clinic and they are prescribing me testosterone. And I'm like, yeah, but look at your cortisol. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And again, we have a video on sex hormones. It's also in that vitamin D talk where testosterone and sex hormones are at the tail end of everything. So yeah, you can look at them, but those will be fixed if you fix everything before it, right?
right.
Vitamin D, cortisol, DHEA. We want to know what those are doing first before testosterone and estrogen, because if those are tanked, you don't stand a chance to make any testosterone or estrogen or progesterone. So because those all come from those. Now, can you supplement those, exogenously while you're fixing the other things? Sure, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You're just accelerating how well you're going to feel sooner, but you're not going to fix the underlying problem if that's all you're going to do. In fact, you might create more problems because of what we talked about in that video of, hey, if you just start taking a bunch of testosterone, you also have the potential to back up that chain and increase LDL cholesterol. Right.
Yeah.
So now you're going to run it into
And
another
there
issue
was
if you
much
don't know.
more as well. That, like, in this video, you specifically highlighted the risks of just taking testosterone prescribed even maybe by TRT clinic if they do not go thoroughly check everything health related, if you can even take it safely.
Yeah.
Just low
Yeah.
testosterone does not mean you need testosterone, because you might have some kind of health implications that actually can harm you, and death is not a really nice outcome.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Death, stroke, heart attack, all of those are possibilities when you start taking testosterone when it's low, because if you don't thoroughly check all your other markers, like blood pressure, cholesterol, and all of those, you may be setting yourself up for an outcome of putting more pressure on this other thing that could kill you.
Yeah, I think this was great breakdown about why are we so adamant to always make sure that you are doing more than in this case scenario, more is more beneficial than less. Do your blood test, do it thoroughly. At least from the beginning what's where, how, what's correlating is what. And ideally, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, try to do it at least twice a year. You have mentioned it
Strategically.
previous videos in beginning of the summers and at the end of the summer, and so on and so forth. And blood testing cannot be overstimulated. You want to be proactive instead of getting ill and then try to fix yourself.
Yeah, because your blood test will be all skewed when you do get ill. Like you don't know which was because of the illness or because of the level of fatigue that you're feeling. You want to be proactive, and doing it strategically at the right times of the year not only tells you exactly what behaviors to change, you're more likely to be successful at changing them in the right season. And then knowing that you can check your progress at the end of the season to potentially see if there are other underlying issues that may be happening, or even remediation type supplements that you might, or medications that you might need to take during the winter time.